I'd like to start off by thanking everyone for being here today, for the words of encouragement and condolences, and throughout the last few years, weeks, months. I'd also like to personally thank Uncle Ted for being such a fantastic roommate, because if Grandpa had gone back to Brampton, I probably would have ended up a Maple Leafs fan, and nobody deserves that. But I have the honor of sharing a few thoughts and memories that I've collected from the grandkids. Being the oldest, I was nominated to do so. So I'll start with the youngest, Samantha. She says, "My favorite memory of Grandpa is whenever the topic of boys would come up, and he'd always tell all of his granddaughters that if you're ever to meet a boy or have a boyfriend, they were going to have to go through him first. But as tough as he made himself sound, she'll always remember Grandpa for the times he spent with us at family parties and sitting through the countless amounts of dance recitals. She'll also never forget the times when him and Grandma would watch her and Sarah, and he'd always greet us at the door, shirtless, with a powdered donut. And if they were lucky, there'd be two waiting for them too." From Jordan. He said, "I'll never forget how Grandpa would come to his hockey games growing up. He was by far one of my biggest fans. Although he loved him being there, it always made Jordan a bit nervous because Grandpa would know if Jordan was out there slacking off, not giving 100%. And if he wasn't, he'd hear about it after the game. He always expected Jordan to use the gifts that he'd been given to the best of his ability. And Jordan says it may helped him to become a better hockey player as well as a better person on and off the ice." From Sarah, she says, "My favorite memories with Grandpa Gallop would be when Sam and I would spend the day at Grandma and Grandpa's house. I'll always remember that their fridge was always fully stocked with Vernors and Pepsi, with donuts always fresh and ready to be eaten on the counter. And if they were there early enough in the day, the four of us would be in the kitchen cooking up pancakes with Grandma off to his side, adding chocolate frosting in between each one because who doesn't love dessert for breakfast? When we weren't eating and drinking everything in their house, we would spend hours, and I mean hours, sitting around the table playing Monopoly. Grandpa was always so patient with my sister and I, and whatever we wanted to do, he was there to make it happen because he loved us that much. Although he slowly became more and more fragile as the years went on, I'll always remember him as a loving guardian who made it clear that if Sam and I ever wanted to talk to boys, they would have to go through him first and have, as he would say, chat. And as a simple man who only loved two kinds of pies, hot and cold." From Shay. "To this day, I can still remember the smell of Grandma and Grandpa's house. I can't explain the smell, but like a memory, I can still smell it when I think about it. I remember spending Christmas Eve with him and Grandma every year, the whole family in Chauncey, everyone eating too much and laughing too much, and Grandpa cracking jokes at the center of it all." She says, "When I turned 16, I, of course, was expecting a car. We were over at their house, and I opened up my presents, and in one was a little box with a key. And she was so excited and ran outside, only to be convinced by everyone in attendance that she was getting Uncle Ted's old truck," which was a beater, as he put it. Luckily, she wasn't getting the truck, but a 1998 Pontiac Sunfire GT with 40,000 tow-along miles behind the motorhome. For the entire time I owned that car, about 11 years, she would call Grandpa to tell him about something new she learned to fix on the car. She said she could tell that he was tickled that his little ballerina was also a little bit of a grease monkey. For her 16th birthday from my Grandma and Grandpa, he told her that he was going to take her to lunch. Not knowing what to expect, she went along, and she had a wonderful time talking, just the two of them. He then took her to his jeweler and showed her a pearl ring that he had picked out just for her. And he went and got it sized. She says he was so excited to spend that time with her. And she'll always remember that day as one of her favorites with him. He was always encouraging and supporting her, When she had graduated college and was working 3 part-time jobs, looking for a full-time job, he was always telling her how proud he was. And at a time when her stress levels, as she says, were through the roof, he always gave her the reassurance that she was figuring this whole adulthood thing out. And a few of mine. When I was little, the earliest one I have is him telling me to encourage me in my schoolwork. We didn't have A's and B's in elementary school. You got an O for outstanding, an S for satisfactory, a U for unsatisfactory. And he told me he'd give me $1 for every O that I got. There were a bit more categories that we were graded on than just math, reading, writing, and science. So I showed up, my 5-year-old me with my report card, and I hand it to him. And he looks at it, and he starts counting. He looks up, gives me the side eye that the look, and he counts again. And after he'd gotten over the sticker shock of the 22 O's that I had gotten, he reaches into his wallet and he pulls out a 20 and he pulls out a 5 and asks 5-year-old me, "Well, you got change for a 5?" I said, "No." He goes, "I bet your grandma does." And he got up and he came back and gave me my $22. And to a 5-year-old in 1990 that didn't even know that money went that high, that was something. And I put it in my bank, and I think it stayed there probably till the ice cream truck came around, and I probably got pilfered from there. Grandpa and Grandma loved to go camping. I remember spending time in the Mini, in the Pace Arrow, and then later on after they retired and moved up to the big one, the Dutch Star, I think is what it was. They toured the country. They went everywhere from all the pictures we saw and looked at, and they were everywhere. But 2 of their favorite spots were Algonac and Addison Oaks. And I remember sitting with Grandma and Grandpa and Uncle Ted and Uncle Don and all them watching the freighters go by at Algonac, and Grandpa pointing them out which ones and where they were probably headed. And I'll always remember that. And one of my favorite stories, at their house on Ramsbury in Troy, they had a shed. And it was in the back corner. We were told, "Don't go by the shed, there are bees." So one day, Grandma and I are in the house, probably playing Sorry or Rummy Cube or Monopoly at the table, and all of a sudden we hear yelling. And we look out the window and see Grandpa just running for the back door. Well, Grandma gets up and she runs and she shuts the door. He's swatting at his pants. And she wouldn't let him in the house because he had bees up his pants, and she didn't want him coming in the house. So she made him take his pants off outside and then let him in the house. And after the swelling went down, we laughed about it with him elbowing me and said, "I still move pretty good for an old guy, don't I?" We'd go to the auto show and look at all the cars, and he'd always be looking at all the different fit and finish of the different automakers and how they did things, and he'd look at all things that I'd never noticed, being a 12 or 13-year-old kid, and he'd explain to me what they were doing, why they did it that way, and why the different automakers do it this way, and why GM would frustrate the mess out of him because they didn't let him do it the way he wanted to do it. But I learned a lot from him. But if there's one thing outside of grandfather, husband, brother, friend, father that I would describe my grandfather to be as a bandsman. And it was his witness, and he always gave the credit to God. As many of you know, he was a fine E-flat horn player, played solo in the band. And he played in the Motor City Brass Band as well. It was his passion, and it's what he loved. And we'd listen to music all the time. And we'd rewind it back when you had cassette tapes. And you'd listen to that part over again, and he'd say, "I love this tuba part," or this, that, or the other. And he was so proud when my second year in the band, we were doing a patriotic-themed concert. And for the final number, we would play Stars and Stripes Forever. Well, we didn't have a E-flat soprano player. So he said, "You should play the piccolo part on your tuba." So at the end, when the piccolo solo kicks in, I stand up and I play it in the concert, and they had a microphone on me and everything, and he was so proud. But I've been, like my Aunt Chris said, she's been approached, and I've been approached by so many different people talking about how encouraging he was when either they were struggling with something in the band, outside of the band, and always told them they were doing a great job and to keep it up, and it's coming along and it's good. And that instilled with myself and my dad, and we still both play and we still both love music. We've both played in the Motor City Brass Band together, and I don't think that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for his encouragement and his passion. And we owe that to him. And I do want to thank all of you guys for coming out. Everyone who loved it, appreciated it. Thank you. In high school, Doug Engel and I, the brass band nerds that we were, organized a 5-piece quintet to go and compete at the solo and ensemble. And of course, we made it through the first one because we're Army players and that's what we do. And in an effort to kind of maybe inspire some of our friends to come on Thursdays and play in the youth band with us, but we played in the States and we got top honors at the States, and so they asked us to play at one of the final band concerts and during the intermission, and Grandma and Grandpa were there, of course. As you've noticed, there's a trend that they were very involved. They were at the dance recitals, at Jordan's hockey games, at my baseball games, and band concerts and all that stuff. We played a Dixieland version of the tune Dwelling in Beulah Land called I'm Living on the Mountain that Bill Himes had arranged. And he came up to me after and he said, that's one of my favorite tunes. That's one of my favorite songs. I loved it. It's actually that Dixieland version. He loved it. And after all the pain and frustration of his body no longer cooperating with him, to me, the chorus of that song really hits home today. He's living on the mountain underneath the cloudless sky. He's drinking at the fountain that never shall run dry. Oh yes, he's feasting on the manna from a bountiful supply, for he is dwelling in Beulah Land. I love you, Grandpa. Thank you.